And thank goodness I have a touch screen. So, welcome to the September Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition meeting. Amy has put the sign in the chat. So if you haven't signed in, please do so. We also record these meetings for people who can't attend. So please know that that is happening as well. And we like to start our meetings talking about our mission and vision so everyone knows that they're on the same page. And if this is not the meeting that you thought, I hope that you still stay and hang out with us because we're going to talk about wonderful things today. So the mission of Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition is that we are a thriving not-for-profit organization advancing diversion and composting of all organics in Illinois through advocacy, program implementation, market and business development, policy, and outreach. And our vision is that all Illinoisans see organic waste as the valuable resource it is, and we are urgently taking action to rescue edible food, divert food scraps to avoid emissions, and utilize the nutrients to ensure soil viability. So thanks for being here. We have a few different speakers today. Our speaker spotlight is SCS Engineers, and we have Spencer LaBelle and Greg McCarron with us for that. Spencer LaBelle is IFSCC board member and senior project professional at Silver Sustaining member SCS Engineers. And he will join his colleague Greg McCarron to give a presentation on national policies and Illinois grants encouraging composting practices and provide insights into food scrap collection, operation enhancements, and emerging technologies in the industry. They will also touch on ways that individuals can impact composting practices in their communities. Spencer serves as a senior project professional for SCS Engineers and has over 9 years of consulting experience in environmental and civil engineering. He has diverse experience in civil environmental consulting for municipal solid waste management, compost facilities, stormwater and erosion control management systems, federal, state, and local regulatory compliance, and site development. Greg McCarron is a USCC certified composting professional and a registered professional engineer. He has over 35 years of experience in all aspects of solid waste management and is SCS's national expert for organics management projects. His experience includes operations, project management, design, permitting, regulatory support, construction oversight, system startup, economic analysis, and technology assessment. We also have with us IFSCC members Doug Gotham from B Burke Engineering, and Kelly Shelton from Quercus Consulting, and they will be introducing themselves at the second half of this presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to our friends at SCS Engineering, and they're going to share their screen. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And after both of the presentations, we will take some time to answer those. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amy. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. A little under the weather today, so I apologize for that. Thank you, IFSCC, for having us. And we're excited to talk to you about what we've been up to locally and nationally with organics management. So I know Amy shared a little bit of our background, but my name's Spencer LaBelle, and I'm speaking with my colleague, Greg McCarron. Greg is the National Organics Management Lead for SCS. He's a certified compost professional and is an engaged member of the U.S. Compost Council. Greg's based in New York, and I work with Greg as part of the organics management services that we provide nationally. And I'm based out of Naperville and live here in Wheaton, Illinois. So we're going to be talking about a lot of topics today. We're not going to be diving into each topic in as much detail as they probably deserve. But we want to touch on the directives nationally for food rescue and organics management, what we're seeing in Illinois in regards to the regulations, and how that fits into play, and what we're doing nationally to help kind of make those initiatives a realized thing. So to start off, discussing these directives and policies, we have these two outward-facing items. The one on the left is prepared by the US EPA, and it is the wasted food scale. This was kind of an updated version It was updated back in October of 2023. And it was updated from a version called the Food Recovery Hierarchy that was released in the early 1990s that specified what the US EPA's goal was in food rescue and food recovery. Now, since the food recovery hierarchy in the early 1990s, the addition of management pathways highlights the development and the progress that the US EPA is continuing to make in managing food waste. And as you can see, the goal of most preferred is preventing food waste, donating, feeding animals or leaving it unharvested. And then we get into the different compost measures before we dispose of it at a landfill or incinerate it. There are other hierarchies too that are out there that are working in play, that are helping shape policy and directive of where we're going. The one on the right is prepared by the Institute of Local Self-Reliance. And this one adds a little bit more granularity to some of the composting aspects that we like to use when we think about community composting and what we can do locally to have an impact. As you can see, we go from edible food rescue to home composting as a less preferred option, but then we get into small scale decentralized composting like community composting, and continue to advance to larger composting operations before we get into landfill and incineration. And these hierarchies continue to set the tone for policies and directives, both nationally and locally, and are a good precursor to where policy is going. In June of this year, the White House, along with the US EPA, USDA, and the US Food and Drug Administration, released their National Strategy for Reducing Food Loss and Waste and Recycling Organics, once again back in June of 2024. And that set about 4 objectives that are very similar to what we're seeing with the hierarchies. The first objective being preventing food loss, followed by preventing food waste and increasing recycle rates for all organic waste. And then we get to this 4th option, which we're seeing a lot of movement in regarding funding and grant opportunities that are focused on preventing food loss and incentivizing composting. So we wanted to also touch on some of these fundings and grant opportunities that are available nationally and will also become more available here in Illinois, that will help continue to make these policies and incentivize these organics management strategies and continue to help them grow. So the first one we want to touch on is the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, or the CPRG grant. That grant was applied for by the Illinois EPA, and they were successfully awarded $430 million to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other harmful air pollutions. The CPRG grant covers a number of different industries and topics related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And one of them is focused on clean agriculture and providing opportunity for natural carbon storage methods through farming practices. Traditionally, when we look at clean agriculture, we think of no-till or low-till practices. But the application of compost or compost amendments can play an important role here as well. And we see that CPRG grant also tied in well to the USDA's incentive program for their soil carbon amendment, or Code 336. What this is it is a subsidy for land application of compost and compost blends to crop fields, pastures, forests, associated agricultural lands, developed lands, farmsteads. So there are additional subsidies as part of this program for operations. We have a number of clients that are utilizing this program to help support compost end use. And what it is it's a subsidy that's provided to agricultural landowners that apply compost and compost blends on a per acre basis. We have not fully understood whether there's a cap on this program, but we do have a lot of clients that are utilizing this program to help support compost end use. In addition, the USDA also has another grant program called the Composting and Food Waste Reduction Grant. And this grant is focused on supporting local and municipal governments with projects to develop and test strategies for implementing municipal compost plans and food waste reduction plans. We've actually seen a few municipalities here in Illinois that have been awarded these grants, such as the city of Decatur, the village of Broadview, Lake County, and the city of Chicago's Board of Education. With the focus of policy and grants and the funding to aid preventing food loss and organics management, it's important to understand how our landscape here in Illinois and our regulatory landscape for compost facilities are tying into that more diversion and management of food waste and food scraps. So brief history, back in 1990, landscape waste, which includes grass, leaves, and brush, was banned from landfilling in Illinois. And shortly after, in 1994, the landscape waste compost facility regulations were created to help manage landscape waste no longer allowed in landfills. As part of these regulations, there is a limit for what's called additives. And those additives include food scrap, livestock waste, crop residue, uncontaminated wood waste, and paper waste. And that these facilities are not allowed to accept more than 10% by volume of these additives into the facility. So most facilities in Illinois, most compost facilities are operating under this set of regulations. In our experience, we haven't seen this ratio limit or this type of ratio limit through regulation in other states. We don't see them in Wisconsin, Iowa, Indiana, and other borders. They're framed a little bit differently. But in Illinois, this is how the regulations are specified. If a compost facility does want to accept more than 10% of that additive, a new permit is required and the facility must operate under a separate set of regulations, this 807 regulations. These types of facilities are known as organic waste compost facilities. And a unique aspect about that new regulation that they would need to fall under is that they would require local siting unless an exemption can be achieved. With policies and programs focusing on preventing food loss, preventing food waste, and increasing recycle rates for organic materials, the 10% additive by volume regulation may become a limiting factor at some point here in Illinois for compost facilities, being that end processor for food scrap or other organic materials. And through our experience at SCS nationally, we've supported the collection, operation, and end use of increased amounts of food scrap beyond that 10% additive by volume. And we're helping other states, compost facilities, municipalities manage those increased volumes. So I'm going to pass it on to Greg, and Greg's going to walk us through a few examples, both nationally and some that are happening locally, that are helping achieve that management of food scrap.
Okay, thanks, Spencer, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Greg McCarron, and as mentioned, I work with SCS in a New York office, and I cover things nationally from a perspective of mainly compost facilities. So I'm going to give some fairly quick overview of different programs that are happening nationally relative to food scrap collection as well as composting. So first up is, point of entry for a lot of cities and municipalities is to put in place a food scrap drop-off program. On the left-hand side of this slide, as well as on the bottom, is Chicago's program. They have 17 drop-off locations with the picture at the bottom, one example of those drop-off locations. And we're seeing this in similarly across the country. On the right-hand side is Tompkins County in upstate New York. So they have I think coincidentally, they're up around 15 or 16 drop-off locations as well. They use box trucks, as shown here in the slide, to pick up food scraps. And those are brought to a dedicated organics transfer station, which then goes on to a private composter. Next slide. And besides food scrap drop-off, folks are looking at curbside collections. On the left is, local to Chicago is Waste Nots program, which is a subscription type program. And so that's fairly popular. There's a lot of relatively small, I'll call them, companies, haulers that may or may not have compost facilities themselves. And often those are subscription based. So you just, you sign up if you're interested in the program. And then there's also folks that are looking at, big municipal programs. So in the center is City of Raleigh. We're actually working for the City of Raleigh right now. They have a current yard waste collection program where they use the green bins. By the way, I'll probably be saying yard waste, green waste, and landscape waste. So those terms are used kind of interchangeably across the country. But Raleigh, among other things, is exploring whether how they want to collect food scraps. One option would be to place the food scraps in their green bins and then process it from there. On the right-hand side is City of Boston. They're using as you can see, those modified van type vehicles to collect food scraps. That's actually done by a private hauler in that case. But there's lots of different curbside collection models and programs that folks can look at. Next slide, please. And one other I find very interesting, another collection program, this FSB. So that stands for Food Scrap Bag Collection System. So this is Ramsey and Washington counties in Minnesota, which is in the St. Paul area. So we're involved with a project there and helped design this facility that you see here on the left and on the right. And so the basic concept is that at the home, residents put their food scraps in a colored bag. Let's say it's an orange colored bag. They put that in their regular trash container at the curb. And in that way, you have just one collection vehicle going down the street, picking up both trash and food scraps. At the processing facility, that material is dumped on the tip floor, essentially shown here on the left-hand slide. The material goes up those conveyors, elevated conveyors shown in blue on the left. And then they pass by robot sorters. So the robots are trained to look for orange bags in this case and pick those up and drop them down the green chute. And so then those bags go on to a compost facility. So, the interplay here, of course, is you have one collection vehicle on the street, but that's played against, obviously added cost with having this processing equipment that you see in these slides. Next slide, please. So that's a quick overview on the collection side. I wanted to get into some compost technologies, and mostly what I'll be talking about is commercial compost. technologies and commercial compost facilities. And so first with technologies, we have everything from turn windrow to ASP, aerated static pile, and various in-vessel and in-building systems. And what we're seeing nationally, the trend is to hybrid systems. So people often are using ASP systems for the first, say, 2 to 4 weeks of the process, and then going out to some kind of turn windrow process. So with the ASP, you're getting process and odor control efficiencies, and with windrows, you're getting cost efficiencies. And these any of these compost facilities can be designed by individuals, could be designed by consultants like ourselves, but also there's a number of vendor supplied systems, and some of those vendors are listed here, ECS, GMT, and so on. And next slide, please. But I want to, make it clear, make sure that everyone knows that I consider that kind of that active composting piece kind of the black box, but everyone needs to know if they're getting into commercial composting, there's an upstream and downstream processing component that can be fairly substantial, especially when you start handling curbside collected material. So there's a lot of general processing, just feeding and movement, typically with front end loaders. And then there's a number of pre-process steps, often that size reduction. So if you're using woody waste as a carbon amendment, you're often grinding or shredding and then blending that material with food waste. And then on the post-process side, there's screening occurring. Next slide, please. And one thing to highlight, common goal and requirement for all compost facilities is, number one, the need to make a high quality, consistent compost that will, keep your customers coming back for more and more. And then, of course, to be compliant with regulations. The key things that we're seeing are odors and air emissions, as well as water management. Both leachate and stormwater are key things to pay attention to from a regulatory perspective. And then finally, just the need to be cost competitive, as much as we hear people talking about being sustainable and green, they also look at the bottom line. And so we need to compete with landfills and other waste management facilities. Next slide, please. So some examples, just quick, just to run through these, just to show some examples across the country. So I mentioned the city of Raleigh earlier. So besides looking at their collection programs and looking to add food scraps, we're also looking to see what we can do to add food scraps to their existing yard waste center, which is shown here in the photo. They use an open windrow turn method right now, which there's that little inset photo on the left-hand side. We're going to be looking at different technologies to employ when and if they take food scrap to this particular operation. Next slide. As mentioned, there's what we see as the trend is a lot of people that are handling food scraps at a compost facility using ASP technology, aerated static piles. This is just one example. This is a public waste district in Vermont, handling about 5,000 tons per year of food scraps. On the left is an open bay, concrete bay with those 4 fingers you kind of see. Those are aerated trenches. And then you can see the material starting to be loaded into this bay. Once that's full, the blower, which is behind that back concrete wall, is turned on, and that's just, as the name implies, it's static. It sits there, but it's also aerated at the same time. Next slide. And so this is the aerial view of that same Vermont facility. We were engaged by the Chittenden Solid Waste District a couple of years back to help them modify and enhance their facility. So in the left third of the photo, you can see the ASP system. In the middle third is a open windrow pad. We helped to design that and lay that out. And then on the right third is their screening, post-processing, and sales blending area. So we helped with some civil site design there. So this is just an example where they're employing a hybrid system, ASP followed by turned windrow to maximize their efficiencies in composting. Next slide. This is an example of an ASP system, but this is now a covered system. This is a gore cover system, so that's what you see in the foreground of the photo. I guess the concept that I wanted to put forward with this slide is that they started off as a yard waste only facility, and back probably close to 10 years ago, they started off running a couple of pilot tests with the gore cover system, which you can see in the middle of the photo. Those white covers, their initial pilot scale facility where they started bringing in food scrap, and they ended up expanding it. So now the 12 bunkers at the bottom, which we designed for them back in, I think it was about 2017 or so. They've been in operation now for 6 or 7 years, handling food scraps and yard waste. And one other just feature quickly to point out in this slide is in the lower right, those white tanks. You see, that's leachate collection. So that's a common feature with food scrap collection, is to collect and contain all the leachate and then recycle that back into the process. Next slide. And this is a final slide for myself, just to introduce that there are some systems out there that are fully in building. This is an example for McGill. This one, I believe, this is a North Carolina facility. So all the composting itself is done under roof. Outside, you see finished compost as well as some woody feedstock amendment that's stored outside. But that's one other example that can be employed from a compost perspective. And next slide, and Spencer, it's back to you.
Wonderful. I think one of the things that's helpful there too is to know that a lot of those facilities that Greg had mentioned are operating with more than 10% by volume food scrap or additives in that space. I know we touched on a bunch of different topics and we touched on them very lightly, but I didn't want to neglect our individual impact here. I think the first thing when I think about our individual impact on the compost industry is to continue to connect and plug into the IFSCC. There's a lot of us here in the IFSCC that are lucky enough to have composting be part of our jobs, but also most, if not all of us, have a personal passion for educating and growing composting in Illinois. This is a great place to build connections, and I'd recommend considering joining one of our committees: Education Committee, Communications, Market Development, Policy, ICAW, and We Compost are all great committees to join. Another way to plug in is to consider joining or sharing the Young Professionals group. If you know of anybody between 21 and 35, or if you know folks that are less than 5 years of experience, the Young Professionals group is another way to build connections here at IFSCC. Two other resources that we wanted to share with you, and I know we're running short on time. Participating in home composting is a really great way to share an impact with the network that you have. Sharing your experiences and educating your family, your friends, your neighbors generates a lot more interest in composting. The Institute of Local Self-Reliance, which we showed some of their graphics at the beginning, they have some great resources when it comes to home composting that can get you started. In addition, community composting is another great way to multiply your impact. Seeking local opportunities or starting your own. There are a few members here in the IFSCC that have done a great job of creating local opportunities. There are also national groups like Community Composter Coalition that Greg's a part of. This photo down here is a community garden that Greg is a part of in his community that he created. and has worked with the Institute of Local Self-Reliance to kind of get that going on a community front. So there are lots of ways to have an impact individually, but would recommend definitely getting more involved in the IFSCC. I know that there's a lot of questions as well in the chat, so we'll try to answer those, but we want to make sure we give our other speakers some time to share.
Thank you, Spencer. Thanks for plugging all of the IFSCC things. You make our job easy, so appreciate that. We're going to turn it over to Kelly with Quercus Consulting, if you want to share your screen.
Hi, Amy, and good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the short delay. I thought we were going to questions. Let me get my screen up. Just to share a brief introduction to Quercus Consulting for those on the meeting today who might not know us. We're not new. We were founded in 1997, and we always like to say when green was just a color. What we do is we combine our clients' sustainability visions with our expertise in the field. We are M and WBE certified, in case that's of interest. The three major areas of concentration for us are environmental justice. And in that regard, what we aim to accomplish is incorporating communities into sustainability, including dealing with food waste. We also like to look into the impacts of various projects on the communities where those projects are located as it relates to environmental justice communities. With our sustainability plan development piece, we, of course, as it's important to this group, we always incorporate food waste, organics management into all of our sustainability plans. But what we help to do, in addition to developing the plan, sometimes we just need to update the plan. Sometimes we have what we've created as a progress tracker for existing sustainability plans to help keep an eye on how things are going and if we're moving in the right direction, if we're on target. And that, of course, incorporates greenhouse gas calculations. As it relates to policy, that gets into more of the what's the goal and helping to establish those goals. We work with both we work with public organizations, we work with local units of government to help bring the full picture together. And what's notable, and we don't want to overlook, is the importance of tracking the progress. Many times we put plans together, but if we're not staying on top of tracking the progress, it kind of sits on the shelf. So that's where Quercus comes in. That's where we like to help. One of my favorite quotes is sustainability without equity is sustaining inequity. It's not my quote. I want to give credit where credit is due. But that's all I wanted to share today. Our contact information is here. I know the deck will go out. And we look forward to engaging more, maybe partnering in some cases. But that's it for me.
Thank you so much. And we also have one last person that's going to talk with us today, which is Doug. I don't know if you have any more comments to share, and then we'll get into questions.
Not really. I mean, I just wanted to point out, Christopher Burke Engineering, we're a member, and we just sort of wanted to put the spin on that. We're on the portion where we're applying the compost, actually using it in our projects. We're primarily a municipal engineering firm, so we do major projects for townships, the state, villages, cities, a lot of roadway projects where we're implementing the compost into rain garden applications. That's one of our primary uses for compost, or median landscape. And that's what you'll see in the meeting minutes, where we can import new soil and we incorporate the compost in that. But we're more on the using it side. So that's just us briefly.
Thanks, Doug. I think that's really great. It's a great note to end on because I think we really oftentimes are focused a lot on the creation of compost, but it needs a place to go. So we appreciate that kind of that little end note there about where it's used. So thank you to all of our presenters. We have a few questions in the chat. I'm gonna just ask them really quickly, and then we'll get moving. Ooh. Okay. So we do have, hold on, I'm actually gonna use. Yeah. So somebody asked, Catherine asked about if you would be able to tell us the percentage of food waste by volume rule for surrounding states. You talked about something in Illinois, but I don't think you mentioned if what the percentage is for other states in the Midwest region. Do you have notes?
Yeah, so it's in regards to the regulation, it's not specified as a percentage. In some regulations, like in Iowa, it's more focused on like the operations and management and maintenance that are specified in the regulation. It doesn't have a percentage of food scrap or manure, that additive added to it. Greg, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think we're seeing somewhere between like 20 to maybe 25% as a ratio in some cases.
Yeah, so the key science is, really looking for a CN ratio of 30 to 1. And so to get there, the rule of thumb is 3 parts carbon, wood waste, leaves, say, to 1 part food. So with that, your ratio would be about 25% food. And so coincidentally, I just was looking, we're doing some work in Massachusetts right now, and they have a general permit for facilities that take less than 5,000 tons of food scraps per year, and so their value is 25%. And in the same paragraph, they do mention the 30 to 1 ratio of carbon and nitrogen. So that's yeah, so that's kind of a typical science-based, I guess, answer to it. I mean, a lot of, as Spencer was just saying, a lot of states might not have an explicit percentage in their regulations. They all vary, of course.
Thank you for the answer. I just wanted to follow that up by asking, and I know this was brought up in previous meetings we've had that you guys were not present for, but do we have a reason for why it's so low here, or is that mainly because of the presence of the lobbying of the waste management industry in Illinois? I'm just curious, based on your professional experience, if you kind of know the origins of that, because it's so much lower than the surrounding states.
Yeah, I can speak to that with a non-answer essentially, and I apologize. I do not know the origin behind the 10%. I'm not sure if I haven't seen the Illinois EPA specify that origin or kind of how that came to be. I'm looking for that answer as well. So that was a very good question.
Thank you.
Liz, do you want to follow up on that before I ask my next question? Liz K.
Sorry, coming. Sorry about that. So, this is a question that's been bubbling up recently the last few months. So the short answer is the 10% in Illinois came basically from IEPA. It's part of the statute that lays out, like as Spencer said in his presentation, it's part of that. It was just the number that went in there. So I can't answer why, like who was involved in presenting that number, but I also don't want to characterize it as low. I mean, I understand it is compared to surrounding states, but I don't necessarily think it was a function of lobbying to keep it low. It just came out that way, and we're trying to figure out if that's a reasonable number, if it should be upped. And that's the kind of things we want to figure out. If processors think it should be, that's a reason to make it happen. Like, it doesn't happen just because some people with pointy hats think in theory it should happen. It needs to happen because the market and the processors want it to happen. So that's the thing that IEPA and legislators would need to know, like, why is that 10% there, and can and should it be changed, and what's the effect on windrow composting? So all of that is what we need to dig into. Sorry, no pun intended. But also I just learned, so sorry, by the way, I'm the for folks who don't know, it's a big call today. I'm Liz Kunkel. I'm the co-chair of the policy committee within IFSCC. I'm also the zero waste policy manager at the Illinois Environmental Council. And so I've been doing some research on this permitting issue specifically through the IEC and legislative advocacy efforts and education efforts to figure out, again, how to change that at the state level. And I did come across some language that I need to, again, dig into more. But it seems like there's an opportunity baseline for written authorization to go above the 10%, period. I don't know under what circumstances, but I just kind of came across that language. So there might be a little bit of wiggle room to begin with to get above the 10%. And then the other question now moving forward is, yes, and if we want to raise it to a different number, what should that be and why? And again, we need people beyond, we need the industry people to give that info to change it realistically from 10% to anything else. That's what I got.
Thanks, Liz. I see Charlie, you're trying to raise your hand, so let me jump in.
1 to 10%, yeah, is not a function of lobbying by any industry. It is an IPA number. It's similar to the number for land application per the ergonomic rate is a 20 tons per acre. We've negotiated and proven in the past that we could do 80 tons an acre, and through application and potentially oversight with the EPA, we're given authority to do that on a different potential project. So I believe the 10% is very similar. If you have your facts and you can prove that there's an ability to handle a greater load, I think that that's part of your application to present to the EPA for a discretionary decision on their part.
Thank you.
This is Paul Walker, if I could interject.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that 10% rule, when they first started, EPA came, that was what they agreed for all other additives could go into an on-farm permit that wasn't permitted. And then that's what helped through to permitting. But if you can justify a higher level when you write your permit, you can go as high as you can justify.
Yeah.
So Illinois is not limited at 10% by any means. That 10% rule is really for those unpermitted sites that have an on-farm exemption or some other exemption. That's where the 10% came from originally. And I think EPA, if you talk to them about it, they're going to tell you that with permit, you can go as high as you can justify. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. This is a great conversation and a good reminder to everyone, if you would like to discuss these things, to please join a committee and get some stuff done. So not to keep pushing the committees, but I think that we have a lot of smart and thoughtful people on this call as usual. And so every voice is really important as we continue to grow as a state. So thanks for that. We have another question in the chat, but I'm actually going to skip it for now because we only have 14 minutes left and we have quite a bit to go. If your question was not answered, please understand that we will answer it. We will send the questions along to our presenters and they will write answers to us and we will put them in the notes of the meeting. And so Amy Bartucci is compiling all the questions. And when she sends out a recording of this meeting, she will also send the notes of the meeting that will have all the questions and answers in them. So thank you for everyone's participation and again, thoughtfulness. We really do have a great group of people here, and thank you to our presenters for all of their information that you provided today. Okay, so we are going to move